Some places don't feel haunted. They feel occupied. The water moves when there's no wind. The reeds shift when nothing should be in them. And the mud keeps tracks longer than it should. And somewhere just beyond the tree line, something with teeth is already listening. Tonight we head into the swamps, to places where the air feels too heavy and the dark feels too close, and the stories sound less like entertainment and more like survival advice. A cursed hunter in the Louisiana bayou, a scaled thing rising out of the South Carolina swamp. 2 states, 2 creatures, one long night in places most people would rather not cross after sundown. I'm Quackster, and this is Quack in the Dark, Urban Legends. Welcome back, Night Watchers. This season, we're crossing America through the legends that still cling to certain places like they belong there. Not just old stories. Residents, warnings tied to woods, roads, bridges, houses, and tonight, water. Tonight's episode is called Swamp Teeth. First, we head to Louisiana, where one of the most feared creatures in the bayou folklore still stalks the imagination, the Rougarou. Then we cross into South Carolina, where a wave of sightings and torn-up vehicles gave rise to one of the South's strangest modern monster legends, the Lizard Man of Scape Ore Swamp. One is a curse with claws, the other is a panic with scales. And in both places where the dark doesn't just hide things, it breeds them. So watch the waterline. Don't trust every sound in the reeds. And if the swamp goes quiet all at once, you might want to leave. By the time Marcel realized the dogs were no longer barking, the swamp had already changed. He stood on a narrow porch behind his cousin's cabin, one hand on the screen door, listening into the dark, where the bayou swallows everything beyond the lantern light. A few minutes later, the night had sounded normal. Frogs, insects, the distant churn of water somewhere beyond the cypress roots, and the dogs pacing the yard and letting out the occasional warning bark at things that moved too close to the tree line. Now there was nothing. Not quieter, wrong. He stepped into the damp grass and called for the dogs. No answer. Just the wet sound of his boots sinking a little into the edge of the ground where solid earth started pretending to be swamp. Then he saw one of them. Not the whole dog, just the eyes at first, low and reflecting near the base of the cypress knee. Marcel lifted the lantern. The animal wasn't growling, wasn't running to him. It was crouched so low that the belly was nearly touching the mud, staring back into the black water and trees with the kind of fear he had only ever seen once during a storm that snapped half the dock apart. Then something moved on the far side of the clearing. Tall. Too tall. And wrong in the way it held itself. Marcel didn't call out. Something in him knew better before his mind caught up. The shape stood half behind a cypress trunk, but he could still make out pieces of it in the lantern's weak glow. Shoulders like a man, head like something built for tearing. The outline of a muzzle, maybe. Ears or points rising above it. Long arms hanging low. The sense more than sight. Of teeth where no face that human should have been carrying teeth like that. Then it took one step. The dog whimpered. Marcel backed toward the porch. The thing in the dark stopped, and from somewhere deeper in the bayou came a howl so rough and low it didn't sound like it had come from the throat at all. It sounded like the swamp itself and found a voice. The next morning, Marcel's cousin found tracks in the mud too long to belong to any dog, too deliberate to be a gator drag, and too human in places for anyone to feel comfortable naming. No one in the family said much over breakfast. They didn't need to. In that part of Louisiana, there was already a name for something like that. The Rougarou. There are some legends that feel ancient the moment you hear them. Not because you know the details, because the name itself sounds old, weathered, passed down carefully from mouth to mouth until it becomes part of the land. The Rougarou is one of those legends. Deep in Louisiana, where bayous twist through the land and cypress trees rise from black water like bones, stories of the Rougarou have lived for generations, depending on who tells it. The creature is a werewolf-like beast, a curse to man, a punishment, or something that moves between those meanings without settling just into one. That uncertainty is part of what makes it frightening, because the Rougarou is not just a monster, it's a consequence. In many versions of the legend, curse falls on those who break sacred obligations, ignore religious rules, or receive the curse through the blood or violence. In others, it's simply a beast that prowls the bayou looking for those unwise enough to be out too late or too far from home. Either way, the message is similar. Do not wander carelessly. Do not mock old warnings, and do not assume the swamp only belongs to animals you recognize. That's what gives the Rougarou its staying power. A random creature is frightening. A creature that may have been human once, or may become human again by daylight, is worse. Because then the legend is not about wilderness. It's about transformation. Punishment. The fear that something recognizably human can be twisted into something built to hunt the dark. It's about transformation. Punishment. The fear that something recognizably human can be twisted into something built to hunt in the dark. And Louisiana is the perfect place for a legend like that. The bayou already feels alive in a way many landscapes don't. Water where there should be ground. Trees rooted in black pools. Fog that changes distance. Sounds that carry strangely and then die without warning. Places where you can still stand for 30 seconds and suddenly feel like you are the least natural thing there. In that kind of environment, a legend doesn't need much help. The setting is already halfway monstrous. Descriptions of the Rougarou vary, but the dread remains the same. A hulking body, a wolf-like or dog-like head, long limbs, teeth too obvious in the dark, a shape that can stand like a man until it decides not to. Some versions lean demonic, some more animal, some almost tragic, but none of them make it safe. And that may be why the Rougarou has survived as long as it has, because it belongs to more than one fear at once. The fear of a wilderness, the fear of being watched, the fear of the curse of judgment, and the fear that evil is not always born evil, sometimes it's made. That idea changes the whole legend. Now the Rougarou is not just some beast hidden in the swamp. It's a reminder that rules once mattered enough for people to build monsters around breaking them. That's powerful folklore. It keeps children close to home. It keeps strangers respectful. It gives the swamp a face sharp enough to match the feeling it already gives people after dark. And once a legend has that kind of use, it lasts. But usefulness alone doesn't explain the feeling that the Rougarou leaves behind. It comes from imagery. A narrow dock at midnight, water barely moving, something tall between the trees. Dogs that stop barking because they've already figured out what you haven't. That's the heart of it. Recognition before proof. You don't need a full view. You only need enough to know you should not still be standing there. Because the Rougarou is folklore shaped by religion, caution, and generations of swamp fear, maybe every sighting was a misread shape in bad light, a large animal seen under stress, or a story retold until it grew teeth. Or maybe some places really do produce creatures that feel half human because human fear has been feeding them for centuries. Either way, the legend survives because Louisiana's bayous make it easy to believe something out there can watch you without revealing itself until it chooses. And if it does choose, it probably won't waste time growling first. So if you ever find yourself in the bayou after midnight and the dogs go silent before the water does, go inside. The Rougarou feels old, like something passed down so many times it stopped sounding like a story and started sounding like a part of the swamp's natural order. But our next legend is different, because if the Rougarou comes from folklore, the next creature comes from something faster. Sightings, panic, headlines, damage people could point to. A monster story born from centuries. But from a moment when enough people looked at the same swamp and decided something had finally stepped too close. Let's head to South Carolina. The Rougarou feels old, like something passed down so many times it stopped sounding like a story and started sounding like parts of the swamp's natural order. But our next legend is different, because if the Rougarou comes from folklore, the next creature comes from something faster. Sightings, panic, headlines, damage people could point to. A monster story born not from centuries, but from a moment when enough people looked at the same swamp and decided something in it had finally stepped too close. Let's head to South Carolina. If you're enjoying tonight's episode, make sure you're following Quack in the Dark and leave a 5-star review wherever you listen. That support helps more people find the show and helps the night watchers keep growing. And if your hometown has a local creature, swamp legend, haunted stretch of road, or a story people still swear is real, send it to me on Facebook, Instagram, or Discord at Quack in the Dark. I want to hear what your part of the world still avoids after dark. And who knows, maybe I'll end up on the next episode. Now let's move into South Carolina, where the swamp didn't just feel haunted. For a while it felt active. A hard, metallic screech from out by the road, followed by something like a heavy thud, and then silence so complete it snapped Christopher fully awake. He sat up in bed and listened. Nothing. Then another sound. Not an engine. Not exactly. More like metal flexing under force. He threw on jeans, grabbed the flashlight from the dresser, and stepped out into the thick South Carolina night with the kind of confidence that people only have for the first 10 seconds before their brain starts supplying worse explanations. His car was parked near the edge of the property, not far from the road that ran alongside stretches of low, wet ground and swampy brush. The flashlight beam found it in pieces. The windshield scratched, the side panel torn up. The driver's door marked with loud gouges that looked less like random damage, and more like something had reached out and dragged its hand straight through the metal. Christopher stopped walking. The beam shook in his hand, and then he saw the mud. Tracks near the car. Not tire marks, not boot prints, something else. Wide, deep, disturbed in a pattern that made no sense at all. He followed them with the light toward the darker edge of the property, where the ground softened into the reeds and black water beyond. That was when the beam landed on the eyes. They reflected back at him from shoulder height. Too far apart, too still. For one suspended second, the flashlight caught just enough. A tall shape. Lean, but wrong. Skin with a texture that swallowed and broke the light like scales or wet bark. Long arms, clawed hands hanging low, and a hand that looked almost human till it didn't. Then it moved. Not charging, not lunging. Just slipping sideways into the reeds with a speed that made the whole shape seem less like flesh and more like something the swamp had assembled on the spot, then decided to take back. Christopher ran. He would later tell people he didn't know what he saw, but he knew that it wasn't. And in South Carolina, especially around Scape or Swamp, there has already been a name waiting for stories like that. The Lizard Man. Some legends grow slowly over generations. The Lizard Man hits fast. That is part of what makes it feel different from older folklore. It was not some colonial curse or inherited fireside warning. This was a modern monster panic. Sightings, damage, local fear, and a creature image vivid enough to spread far enough beyond the swamp that supposedly birthed it. And the setting helped. It always does. Scape or Swamp is exactly the kind of place where perspective gets unreliable. What ground? Dense growth. Reeds. Mud. Standing water and stretches of darkness that seem to sit low over the land. Swamps are good at hiding scale. Good at swallowing movement until it's close. Good at making the ordinary feel distorted. That makes them ideal territory for a creature legend. Especially when one described the way the Lizard Man was. Tall, powerful, reptilian. Long fingers tipped with claws. Red or glowing eyes in some versions. A body just human enough to be disturbing and just non-human enough to feel impossible. The balance is important. If a creature is too animal, people eventually file it away. If it's too human, they look like a prankster. But something about this sits in the middle. Humanoid, scaled, wrong. Stays with people. It gets under the skin. The Lizard Man legend is tied closely to reports of damaged vehicle, and that detail matters. Because once a monster story leaves marks, it changes. A sighting can be laughed off. Torn metal is harder, or at least it feels harder. And moment people can point to scratches, dents, and damage that looks too violent or too bizarre to explain clearly. The story gains weight. Now the creature is not just something seen, it's something touched. It is something that touched the world back. That is how panic legends grow. Fast, messy, public. The Lizard Man became more than a local rumor because it gave people several things at once: a strong image, a perfect setting, and evidence, or at least aftermath, dramatic enough to fuel imagination. And once that happens, every road near the swamp becomes part of that story. Every late-night drive feels different. Every patch of reeds catches more attention than it used to. Every unexplained sound near water becomes suspicious. What makes the Lizard Man especially unsettling is how modern its fear feels. The Rougarou is old-world dread, curse, transformation, and punishment. The Lizard Man is different. It feels like mutation, misclassification, an animal that shouldn't exist, a thing that belongs less to folklore and more to panic of seeing something new that your brain cannot comfortably sort into the world you thought that you understood. That's sharp fear, immediate fear. The kind that doesn't ask whether you broke a rule or stepped onto haunted ground. It just asks whether a thing in the marsh just noticed your headlights yet. And reptiles bring their own kind of horror. Mammals feel familiar, even when they are dangerous. Reptiles don't. They feel older, colder, harder to read. So when you stretch a reptilian features over a tall humanoid frame, you create something that feels biologically wrong in a way many people struggle to shake. Scaled skin, clawed hands, eyes catching the light wrong. A body upright enough to feel like it chose that posture. That image does the rest of the work by itself. Maybe the whole thing was exaggeration wrapped around damaged cars and bad late-night sightings. Maybe the swamp distorted shapes and fear filled in the anatomy. Maybe someone saw an ordinary animal under extraordinary conditions and a local frenzy did the rest. Or maybe, one night, near Scape or Swamp, something tall and scaled really did step out far enough into the light to leave scratches on metal and a permanent change in how people looked at that road. Either way, the legend survives because it fits the place too well to die easily. The swamp already felt like it was hiding something. The Lizard Man gave it a body. And if you're driving near black water after midnight and hear claws on the side of your car, do not get out to check. Two states, two swamp legends. Two different kinds of teeth. The Rougarou feels ancient, a cursed hunter tied to the old fears, rules, and darkness of the Louisiana bayou. The Lizard Man feels modern, sharp, sudden, and born from the kind of local panic that leaves marks behind. One comes from folklore, one comes from frenzy. But both survive because the swamps make the perfect home for fear. They hide too much. They sound too alive. They make distance unreliable. And once a creature gets attached to a place like that, every ripple, every reed movement, every sudden silence starts to feel personal. Maybe that's what the best swamp legends do. They don't just tell something dangerous lives there. They make the whole place feel like it already knows you arrived. So tonight, Night Watchers, I want to know, which one gets under your skin more? The cursed thing stalking the Louisiana bayou, or the scaled shape slipping back into South Carolina reeds? Come tell me on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord at Quack in the Dark. And if your town has a local creature, haunted stretch of water, or legend people still whisper about after dark, send it my way. It may end up in a future episode of Quack in the Dark. I'm Quackster, and this has been Quack in the Dark. Stay out of the marsh. Trust the silence when it turns wrong. And if the swamp still goes before you do, assume something heard you first.